subscribe.
Ronnie Kray often said that if anyone arrested him it would be Nipper Reed. He regularly asked his spies for news of the cunning little bastard, but Reed's duties as a detective chief inspector had kept him right away from the twins since the McGowan case. For Ronnie this had been a great relief. There was something about Reed that made him uneasy. The most satisfying minor victory of the McGowan business came when he upset Reed's career by involving him in the publicity of the Hideaway Club party. Reed shared Ronnie's belief over the lack of contact. The twins never managed to destroy his reputation, but he counted the McGowan case as the biggest failure of his 22 years as a policeman. In his own eyes, he had taken a long time to redeem himself, although success had followed as soon as he was away from the twins. On the Great Train Robbery investigation, he seemed to typify the new-style technocrat investigator, as opposed to Butler, the star detective of New Scotland Yard. Butler, every schoolboy's idea of what a great detective should be, as Reed described him, relied on speed, experience, and intuition. Reed was an organizer, believing in teams of efficiently directed detectives performing prodigies of detailed work. Butler got the arrests. Reed and his men produced much of the detailed evidence to make the case stand up in court. He had another big success organizing teams of detectives to keep down West End crime among the extra crowds in London for the World Cup in 1966, but Reed still nourished one ambition: the murder squad. The following year he made it. At 43, he was promoted to detective superintendent, posted to the yard and entitled to wear the maroon tie with the embroidered globe pierced with a stiletto, the badge of Scotland Yard's top 12 detectives. Early in the autumn of 1967, he spent several weeks settling into the yard and hoping for a copybook murder for his first big case. When the case came, the assistant commissioner, Peter Brodie, summoned him personally to explain that he wanted him to take over a top-secret investigation. It had been started some months earlier by Superintendent Ferguson Walker. Walker was being promoted and Reed was the only man available to take his place. The aim of the investigation was to catch the Krays. Despite his lack of height, at 5 feet 7 inches, he had had to take stretching exercises to get himself accepted by the police. Reed would make an ideal detective for a television series. A sharp-eyed, compact man with dark hair and a quiet smile, he looks the part. He also sounds it. The faint Midlands brogue mixed with the policeman's diction gave the impression of crispness and the common touch. He seems a very human man, but Nipper Reed is essentially a loner. Since he joined the force at 21 to escape from a job in a player's tobacco factory, Nipper has made the police his world. He has no hobbies and despite the ease of manner, few intimate friends beyond his family. A policeman never knows when friendships and outside interests could impinge on his duty, and Nipper acts as if policemen should not be quite like other men. He has a Scottish wife and a teenage daughter. Both have long ago accepted that he is a copper first, a married man second, and that's that. Had he been a vindictive man, he might have been excited at the chance of getting even with the twins, but he had been a policeman too long to believe in vendettas. They were a dangerous self-indulgence, a betrayal of his ideal of the cool police professional, and no revenge was worth getting mixed up with the Krays again. Nipper Reed drove his red Volkswagen back to his home in Barnet after his interview with the assistant commissioner. It seemed as if he could never shake free from the Krays. This should have been his moment of success. Brodie was talking about top priority investigations to catch the twins. Nipper knew from experience what an interminable business this could be. He knew how cunning they were, how difficult to catch. A failure was not the way he wanted to begin his career with the murder squad. Next day he started finding out how much was known about the twins, hardly enough to cheer him up. In 1964, they had been publicly denounced for what they were. the leading organizing gangsters in the country. Since then they had committed murder and tangled with several top detectives from the Yard. But thanks to the strange class structure of the Yard, none of this knowledge can have reached the levels where the decisions were made. There had been a curious lack of urgency about the police investigation of the city's leading gangsters. Even the killing of Cornell had done little to shake this. Reports on the twins were scrappy. There seemed little attempt by the police to keep up with them or even to assess them. It had needed a shake-up of the top men at the Yard and public outcry at gang warfare to persuade New Scotland Yard to notice them. This had occurred earlier in 1967. Sir John Waldron had replaced Sir Joseph Simpson as commissioner, with Brodie as his new second-in-command, and the Richardson trial was giving London gang life its first real publicity. This was when rumours started that it would be the Krays' turn next. Ferguson Walker took charge of the small investigation that was starting, but the Yard possessed so little on the twins that he had to begin at the beginning. In the months since he had uncovered details about their frauds and several long firms, and also the connection between the twins and Cooper's private bank. Apart from this, his work confirmed what Reed had learnt about the twins 3 years before, and made it plain that they were now so strong that it would take a lot to shift them. There was just one thing Nipper Reed had not foreseen. This revived interest in the Krays among the senior members of the Yard. After the years of apathy, they were prepared for almost anything to catch the twins. One man who understood this was John Rose, head of the murder squad, a shrewd, silent old detective who earned the nickname One Day Johnny from the speed with which he used to solve his murders. He helped Reed work out the facilities he needed. The investigation of the Krays soon turned into a full-scale campaign, backed by the full resources of the Yard, with Nipper firmly in command. He wanted similar teams ready to dig out evidence against the twins as his men had against the great train robbers. There were few detectives who had worked with Walker. Detective Sergeant Hemingway and Lloyd Jones had been checking on the twins for months. So his first request was for more men. Soon he had 14 working for him. The next necessity was secrecy, both from the Krays and from the Yard itself. During the trial of the Richardsons, there had been disturbing rumours of a spy at Scotland Yard. The twins were known to have told potential witnesses that anything they said would always find its way to them, so rather than take chances, John Rose arranged for Nipper's team to be an undercover operation run from outside the Yard. On the far side of the river from the Yard was Tintagel House, a modern block of government offices used by the Department of the Receiver of Metropolitan Police. Nothing could be more nondescript. Once they had offices here, Reed and his men could disappear into the anonymity of the civil service. Even within the Yard, contact with Tintagel House was kept to a minimum, effectively to Brodie and Rose. To damp down speculation over what was happening across the river, a rumour was put around that the men there were busy on a #1 docket, a full-scale inquiry into police corruption. And Nipper got a cover story too, a full-scale murder of his own to solve. A girl had died in Dublin, Nipper's name and the inquiry went up on the murder squad detail board in Scotland Yard. With all this, Nipper still had one request, a strict time limit to his assignment. Rose agreed to a conditional 3 months. Nipper Reed had been nicknamed for the speed and cunning of his attack when he had been lightweight boxing champion of the police, and he was to show the same qualities as he began to organize his private army against the Krays. His vitality was catching, also the sense of drama at the task which faced him. This was a dangerous, clever enemy they were fighting. Secrecy was vital. All members of the team were to have revolver practice. All were to take elementary precautions to protect themselves and their families. Cars should not be left out in the open where they could be tampered with. Routes home were to be varied every day, care taken against being followed. Despite all these elaborate precautions, the twins soon knew that Nipper Reed was back. By mid-October, They had learnt about the new department in Tintagel House. At first, they were a little flattered, then they began to take precautions of their own. One was the attempt to silence Leslie Payne. Ronnie believed that he was just about to talk to Reed. Yet in November, when McVitie died, despite all Nipper Reed's vitality and the high-powered planning at the yard, the police were still so far from the twins that no one at Tintagel House connected them with the murder. The first the yard heard was that Jack the Hat was missing. Later an informer said there was a rumor that 2 men with Greek-sounding names were involved. Cypriots were blamed. Nipper believed that there was still one way to get the twins. The strategy was simple, but required an immense amount of work. This was an attraction in itself. Work appealed to him. All previous police attempts to get them, his own included, had failed through trying to catch them over one big crime. The twins had proved that this would never work. The law was weak. The twins were powerful enough to twist it any way they liked. They could employ the finest lawyers to defend them. They had intimidated witnesses and got at jurors. They could always pay others to take the blame or give an alibi. They had their friends in the press to make the most of any slip by the police. But there was one point where Reed knew the twins were vulnerable: their past. For more than 12 years now they had been extorting money, maliciously wounding and organizing large-scale crime. Each of their crimes must have had its victims. If he could find them and get them to talk, the twins were finished. Nipper wrote 30 names down in a small black notebook. He called it his delightful index. There was no more talk now about his 3 months' attachment to the case. For the first time he began to see himself as the man who caught the Krays. But for his plan to work he needed help from Scotland Yard. Just before Christmas he and John Doe Rose had a long session with the top police lawyers. Reed had a way with lawyers. Unlike most policemen, he is at home in court, clear-cut, unsubservient, extremely sharp, and as he faced the lawyers he explained exactly what he needed. He was confident he could catch the Krays, but the evidence against them would have to come from criminals. These were the men the twins had worked with, and the police must have discretion to overlook serious crimes as the price of talking. No lawyer likes the idea of deals with criminals. Nipper insisted there was no alternative. As he explained, could he have found a set of bishops and top businessmen to testify against the Krays he would have done so, but since the twins did all their business with other criminals, these were the only witnesses available. If the lawyers disapproved, now was the time to say so. The law would certainly be saved a messy case. The twins would just as certainly stay free. There was a long discussion. Nipper Reed is a forceful man in a debate, and his case seemed unanswerable. This was the price the law would have to pay for leaving the Krays immune so long. By the end of the afternoon, Nipper had obtained the pained assent of the lawyers and prepared to go down into the sores after the twins. The twins soon guessed what Reed was up to as word began to filter back about the people he was seeing. There was not much they missed. This was the sort of secret warfare they could understand. Both had good memories for people they had hurt, and soon began to block the loopholes in their past. Several of the men they had shot or wounded were brought to their solicitors and told to swear affidavits exonerating the twins. A general warning was passed out through gangland in case anybody felt like talking to the police. Each member of the firm was made responsible for keeping tabs on 2 or 3 potential witnesses. A few days later, Nipper found himself asking a man the twins had maimed and ruined why he would not help him put them safely away. "I hate the sight of blood," the man replied, "particularly my own." Just when it seemed as if the twins were winning, one of their old mistakes caught up with them. Nipper got his first big stroke of luck. There had been no need for Ronnie to send Jack the Hat to try to silence Leslie Payne. Payne was too shrewd a man to talk to the police. But Jack McVitie's vain attempt to kill him and his subsequent disappearance made Payne think twice about his safety and his family. Had the twins left him alone, he would have done nothing to harm them. Once they had tried to kill him, he had no future until they were safely locked away. Payne is a cold fish, with his pale blue eyes and careful manner. He had no way of knowing whether the twins would try again, but he was on his guard. He made doubly sure about the locks on his doors, kept all his curtains drawn, and stayed out of sight. When Sergeant Hemingway approached him as part of Nipper's plan to check all contacts with the twins, he told them he was prepared to talk. He would give everything he knew. It would take quite a while. Reed was skeptical. He had enough on Payne to know that he was too big a name to give himself up for nothing. He agreed to meet him next night in a West End bar, but went convinced that it was a trap. Payne was at ease, dressed in a lightweight dark blue suit and foulard tie. Reed had a gun and was covered by two of his men. Finally, he was convinced that Payne meant every word he said and really was prepared to talk. The full interrogation lasted 3 weeks. Payne shrugged aside the offers of police protection, so Reed chose a quietly down-at-heel hotel in Marylebone, hoping that the Krays' eyes wouldn't reach that far. He arrived each morning punctually at 9 o'clock. Payne would unhurriedly appear about 10 in a taxi. Then, with a police guard sitting in the next-door bedroom, the questioning would start. The guard made coffee. Meals were sent up from the cafe around the corner. Nothing was omitted from the questioning. Each morning Reed read over what Payne had said the day before. Payne had a meticulous memory. Nipper checked places, names, dates, and bank account numbers against his statement. Payne would then sign and date it, and the questioning continued. It was nearly Christmas before it finished. Payne's statement ran to more than 200 pages and detailed everything he knew about the twins, the early frauds and gang fights, the entry into Esmeralda's barn, protection, and the long-firm frauds, the share deals, rackets, woundings, and connections with the mafia. All the names Payne remembered were included, together with the figures, facts, and places. It was a blueprint for a prosecution. All Nipper needed now was proof and witnesses. As his war against the twins gained ground, Nipper's real talents showed. Like a good general, he could see his one advantage over the twins and make the most of it. He had the initiative now and numbers on his side. He could no longer hope to keep the investigation secret, but he could keep the twins guessing by working fast. Speed and surprise might crack their wall of silence. By Christmas, Tintagel House was mobilized. 20 men were working on the case. Superintendent Donald Adams had taken charge of documentation, with 3 policewomen to help. Nipper and his detectives went into action. It was a very big, simultaneous investigation. The different crimes and victims named in Payne's statement had to be verified before the twins could get at them. There was no time for conferences or the sequence of routine inquiries. Each policeman operated separately, directly responsible to Nipper Reed. As well as countless inquiries in London, they had to go to Scotland, Canada, Belgium, Spain, and the United States. Prisoners were interviewed. All the time Reed's men knew that they could easily be signing a potential witness's death warrant. Although the twins had failed to silence Payne, there were a lot of others still worth shooting. They tried. Just before Christmas, one of the firm was sent to Scotland to deal with a potential witness rumored to have talked to Reed. The twins' man was picked up with a gun in Glasgow. Naturally, he admitted nothing. Not all the twins' attempts were so inept. Time after time the detectives visited someone they believed would talk, only to find that somebody had been there first and he had changed his mind. Despite these setbacks, Reed began to get results. The whole department was now working around the clock. The pile of statements was now feet high and growing daily. The police knew more about the twins than they ever had and were closer to destroying their whole organization than at any time since 1964. Only one difficulty remained. As a firm safeguard for his witnesses and an inducement to make them talk, Nipper devised a clause attached to all their statements which guaranteed them that the evidence would not be used until the Krays were safely under lock and key. He still had to get them there. Clad in their slacks and vests, smoking and drinking endless cups of hot sweet tea, the twins would meet late in the afternoon in their mother's flat to argue about their latest plans. They picked up the current rumors, made certain of what each member of the firm was doing, heard the reports sent in by spies and allies. Since Reed took over the investigation, it had become a personal affair. Ronnie was for killing him. Reggie was more reasonable. He knew about the clause in all the statements. He also knew that the key witnesses in the Cornell, McVitie, and Frank Mitchell cases dared not talk. The firm was keeping constant watch on all of them. Reggie was coming to his senses. The blonde who had stayed with him in Tangier was fond of him. He was so sad and such a lonely man. I never knew quite what he wanted, nor did he. Once he stopped drinking, he could be remarkably efficient. During this time he introduced fresh standing orders to the firm. No risks or unknown propositions were to be accepted. Unnecessary violence would cease. Firearms and weapons were to be moved to safer hiding places. No one would carry guns without an order from the twins. Telephones were for emergencies. Conversations would be coded and kept short. He understood the pressure there must be on Reed to tie the case up quickly. This was to the twins' advantage. They could let everything tick over now indefinitely. All the firm's energies could be used for keeping people loyal. No one was permitted to forget that, if we go, half London will go with us. So while Reed and his men were rushing around the world and making do on 4 hours sleep a night, the twins and their close followers took life easy, with weekends in the country and most nights drinking. Their regular sources of income were so carefully tied up that money still came in with very little effort, not quite as much as in their wildest days, but still enough for most of what they wanted, and it was safe. The hardcore of protection business stayed with them to the end. They had their bankers too, who were far more secure than ordinary banks. Banks are crooked as assholes. Shop you to the law as soon as look at you. That's what they did with the Richardsons. Instead, they had entrusted money to several of the rich men they had known, men who would always have enough to hide to make them vulnerable. Such men were useful in emergencies. Ronnie pulled one out of bed at 3 a.m. to write a check for several £100s he needed. Another took care of the purchase of the house he chose in Suffolk. "We've got no need to worry," Ronnie said. "Reg and me will never go short of a bob or two." The Brooks at Bildeston near Sudbury was an unlikely place for his retirement. That was why Ronnie wanted it. This comfortable Victorian mansion set in a sleepy Suffolk village offered the perfect cover for the new life he was planning. The house was tile-hung and gabled with long lawns, flower beds, a paddock, and a strip of woodland out beyond the billiard room. At weekends now the twins would both come here, bringing their favorite members of the firm for company. While Nipper's men kept watch from the damp shrubberies, Ronnie would play his latest part, the country squire. The police would see him as a burly man in tweeds, leaning on the white gate by the lodge, smoking a cigar or patting the donkey in the paddock. Sometimes he strolled down to the village for a drink, or wandered around his land swinging an ash plant. He and the firm began redecorating rooms. On Sundays, everyone would eat a mammoth lunch cooked by Violet. Like a good Cockney mother, she would make the boys drink the greens water that the vegetables were cooked in. They needed all their vitamins these days. Nipper was getting worried now. He had to get results, and the twins were being far too canny for his liking. Now that he had the broad foundations of his case, he hoped to tempt them to make some mistakes. Instead, their cunning looked like saving them again. He couldn't know how brittle a facade their show of easy living was. The strain of the investigation was affecting them. Behind the parties and the long weekends, the twins were in the middle of another crisis. Reggie, who had almost recovered from his bereavement, was all for caution. When he could bear to think about McVitie, he was horrified, but the whole killing seemed so utterly unreal that he could usually avoid the memory of it. Most of the time he thought about survival and escape. He was in love again. It was the same old dream, only the girl was different. The idea of the understanding blonde was taking the place of Frances. Writing about her in a letter, he said, "I hope to settle in the country with Christine, get married, and have a couple of children and leave the past behind me. Christine and I both like the country, and I'm sure it's the best place for a fresh start. With her and some children and the country as our home, I know I will be happy. Meeting her has been a lucky break for me, as she is a wonderful person. I intend to cut away from all my drinking companions in London. That's why until I do so, I dread going back to London. Recently, I have had anonymous phone calls saying I'm going to be arrested soon, others saying I'm going to be shot or run down by a car. Reggie wanted to shut up shop, forget the past. This hardly suited Ronnie. Reggie could not desert him now when he needed him so much. This was the culmination of their lives. He had tried to make a man of him, but he was just a coward. How could he let Reed frighten him? To show Reggie what he thought of the police, he rang Harrod's pet department, knowing the law was listening in. He asked for the most cunning snake they had. They sent a python around to Braithwaite House. He named it Reed, and for hours with it he twined it around his arm. He called it rude names and fed it live mice. When the argument started over Reggie's girl or the need for action, Ronnie would scream that Reggie's fears were babyish. Reed was a snake. Grown men weren't afraid of animals. He would put on his best suit, then stalk off through the streets of the East End under the noses of the police. He was still not quite sure what would be, but he was burning with impatience. Time was short, the enemy was all around. He was an artist with his greatness to consider. Nothing that he had done counted against what he could do. Where Reggie thought of nothing but escape, Ronnie had everything worked out. Soon he would leave the East End for his house in Suffolk. It was to be a fortress and a pleasure house. To guard against his enemies, he would have the house surrounded with an electrified fence. Mountings for searchlights and machine guns were being fixed in the roof, steel shutters made for all the windows. There was to be a secret well, a hidden stock of food, a radio transmitter, an underground garage for his rolls. His parents were already living in the lodge on the estate, leaving the flat at Braithwaite House for him and Reggie when they wanted it. Within a few months, a good-looking friend was coming out of prison. He would join Ronnie at the big house as servant and companion. They would have friends to stay, enjoy their boys, conduct their parties, live in style. But before that, he had to fight his last big battle. If Reggie had lost interest in his dreams, others could appreciate them. Alan Cooper had disappeared when Walker and his men swooped on his private bank. He seemed to have a knack of floating clear of trouble. Now he was back, and Ronnie found in him the man he needed. Others saw Cooper as a stuttering American with thinning hair and wondered why he came to Whitechapel when he was clearly scared of Ronnie. He couldn't drink because he had an ulcer, so sat and smoked his long thin Swiss cigars while Ronnie drank. He would talk, his sharp New York voice stuttering out details of international crimes, a twilight world of licensed killings, monumental deals, unmentionable men. This was what Ronnie longed to hear. Reggie was skeptical, but Ronnie reminded him that the machine guns Cooper sold them had certainly been genuine, so were his contacts with the mafia, his various flats around the world, and his big Rolls-Royce. Sometimes, as if to prove that he was genuine, Cooper would bring photostats of Scotland Yard reports. These would invariably prove to be correct. At other times he would become the informed advisor, always impressing Ronnie with the need to think big. He kept insisting that Ronnie was on a par now with the top men in the mafia and the important continental gangsters. He had the chance to be the man behind the scenes, building a syndicate of killers to work anywhere in Europe. Cooper could be the brains, Ronnie the power, living out in the country like a gentleman, directing crimes that Scotland Yard would never hear of. As Cooper put it, Ronnie would soon be like the head of General Motors, president of a business corporation, working with international associates. Reggie kept hearing rumors about Reed. He dreamed of breaking free, but there was Ronnie. Apart from all the ties that bound him to his twin, he knew that Ronnie on his own would certainly do something to involve them both. After McVitie's murder, Reggie had to stay. All he could hope for was to hold on long enough for the investigation to blow over and for Reed to be discredited again. He was a very anxious man and sometimes questioned journalists and old friends from the past. "What have you heard about the other side?" he'd ask. "Is the law cracking? What do people think about us? Do they believe that we're as bad as the Richardsons?" Ronnie had never cared about such things. He was becoming bored with Reggie's neat precautions. Cooper was giving him ideas. Reggie saw Cooper as a menace. How could they trust him? How could his brother know he wasn't working for the other side? For some while Ronnie sullenly refused to answer, he needed Cooper. Then to keep Reggie quiet he said he had a test for the American murder.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.